Welcome to the House Ag and Natural Resource Budget Committee. Um, First on the agenda is a KDHE environment, and we're just kind of going to go here. The first person up I've got is Representative Lance Neely. Huh? Lance Neely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Corbett and members of the committee. I'm Lance Neely, State Representative for the 42nd District. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you in regards to this involving the landfill in my district in eastern Kansas. I won't go into a lot of facts and figures, though there are a preponderance of them that you have not heard. But one that you should know is that KDHE has been at the landfill dozens of times in the last 12 months and is monitoring and enforcing regulations. I have seen this firsthand. I have been on top of this and everything since several months ago. Instead, I will tell you that I spent about 3 hours at the landfill Friday driving all around and looking at all the entire operation of the site. I was actually present when the deputy director of KDHE arrived and began his drive around the facility. I witnessed him getting out of his vehicle and walking great distances and checking different areas. And I will not speak to his findings, but the entire time that I was out there, there was no smoke and there was no fire. Okay. Now I know you've been told that this has been happening, and it does happen, and it's possibly burning underground. That can happen. So, without the operator of the landfill pointing out where they had dug to extinguish the fire, one would not even know there had been one. We drove with our windows down the entire time, despite the fact it was pretty chilly at times, especially on top of the hill. The majority of the areas around there, you cannot smell anything but trees and dirt. There is an area that you can smell stuff. And I admit to that. He admits to that. When they're doing stuff and before stuff gets covered up, there is a smell and everything. And I would imagine that when an actual fire is going, that's going to exacerbate that and everything, considerably. Um, but to say that it was unbearable is just simply not so. We had our windows down and drove around for hours. The area up there is absolutely beautiful with trees and ponds and rock faces and stuff that way. There's a small area that they do the dump on, and so um, when the I will tell you that the videos and pictures that the committee was provided with prior to this were when the actual fire was occurring or immediately after. Like I said, when I was out there, there is no fire. You cannot tell there was a fire. You do not see any smoke or anything. Now, occasionally they say it pops up. And in fact, I just talked to somebody that said that they could see smoke from it today. Anything. That happens. There are 8,300 fires in landfills in the United States every year, and they burn, combustion, stuff like that. They pop up, they go out, they put them out, they cover them up, all this kind of stuff. It's part of a landfill, and nobody wants a landfill in their backyard. Nobody does. So, um, this fire has been burning off and on since the 1990s. It has not just been something that just happened. It has been on fire. Actually, when it was owned by the county, there were multiple fires out there. All being said, the county's original mishandling of this situation was so egregious that it spurred the county to vote to pay a $200,000 settlement lawsuit for persecution, harassment, and shutting down the landfill illegally, it could regenerate a $22 million lawsuit that is pending. This won't bankrupt our county, but it probably will bankrupt my constituents if they have to raise the taxes to pay for that lawsuit. To me, in that settlement, the most important part of my testimony, which is that the county is hiring an engineer, a third-party engineer, and the landfill is hiring a third-party engineer. What you have, Mary Hang, that I've passed out to you is the first testing by that engineer. And on the 5th page in, it shows you the conclusion of what those engineers found just over a week ago on, I believe it was February 10th. That was when the testing occurred. I appreciate the committee giving me an opportunity to speak on an issue I've dealt with daily and spent many hours trying to assist both sides being the landfill and my constituents, in coming to a peaceful solution. I'll continue to monitor and constantly and closely, and I will not let this go. I will continue to go out there. I will continue talking to my constituents. I will continue monitoring the fire. And I am available for questions at the appropriate time.
Committee, any questions? Representative.
Why can't it be put out? It's been over 2 years.
Like I said, it's been going since 1990.
Why?
Because it burns underground.
If you take the oxygen away, it's going to smother it out. Why can't
they cover it up? If you speak to fire professionals, they will tell you, that when you cover it up, there's just enough oxygen that they can spur back up. They also put vent holes in there to make sure that happens, and it actually sometimes causes it to turn around and burn back up. But literally, combustion of materials can turn around and ignite underneath the ground. So the fire may be over here one day, and it may be 350, 400 yards and everything another day. So as far as putting out, I asked the same thing and talked to the fire professionals. I called the state fire marshals. They were aware of it and that it was contained.
You're aware that we heard a completely opposite testimony than what you're giving us. And these are the people that live right there every day.
Exactly.
So
and I'm telling you that I drove around there and you could not see a fire. You saw no smoke and everything that day. And I was there for 3 hours driving around in a truck, and I walked around and there is no smoke. There was no fire. And but I said, it can pop up in little areas and stuff like that. And when it does, they dig that up, they cover it up, they put vent holes in, they pump what they call a slurry. They don't use water. They use a slurry, which is a mixture of mud and stuff that way, to turn around and put it down in there and to try and put it out if they find where areas that it's popping up. But like I said, this has been going on since 1990, not just now. But it happens at almost every landfill around, almost every single one.
Is there any hope you'll ever get this out?
Well, yes, absolutely. I would hope so. And I can tell you from the landowner that he's trying everything he can do to try and put it out. He digs it up and everything. He puts vent holes down. He's putting the slurry in. And he doesn't wait for somebody to call about it. He turns around and tries to do that. So, but when these fires occur, very seldom do you immediately put them out. Usually it takes a year to 2 years before these fires are put out. And if you look that up and everything, you will find that is the case. Sometimes it's burning 150 feet underground when it turns around and burns down through the layers and everything of stuff.
How many years has this burnt, though? I mean, what's it, like 20 or so, you said?
Well, yeah, it was actually owned by the county.
That's more than a year or two.
No, I know, but I'm saying they just keep popping up and everything. You have fires at landfills, 8,300 a year in the United States at landfills alone.
I like your questioning. We got lots of questions.
Sure. I just think that after 20 years, something should have been done.
You can talk to him.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for your testimony. This is obviously a construction and demolition landfill. You know what construction and demolition is, I'm pretty sure. Did you see any materials other than that out there?
And in fact, the majority of almost everything out there is covered. Okay. With the exception, there was some fencing type stuff, which is construction. Piles of things like this that are metal, and they have not been buried yet. But the majority of almost everything out there is buried, and I think they will say.
Okay. Did you see? Did you see the pictures that we saw last week that showed mattresses and everything else out there? And now you're saying there's nothing. Are you saying those people made those pictures up?
I have not seen the pictures that they had, but I did not see that stuff.
Okay. I have one more question.
Okay.
What was the wind? How hard was the wind blowing the day you were out there?
Probably anywhere from 20 to 25 miles an hour out there.
Thank you, Representative. In the interest of fair play, Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Senator Pittman. I'm in Senate District 5. This is right outside my district boundaries, just so we know. Up in Leavenworth, it's right outside Fort Leavenworth in an area called Easton, which is probably 5 miles from Fort Leavenworth. And I'm going to tell you, I went out there and I met with the folks out there, and it is a problem. And I heard previous representatives. I've got a difference of opinion. This place was owned by a construction company for many, many years, and they had a very minor kind of load inside of there. It was really pretty much building materials for a long time. Individual got into financial straits, went over to the county, and the new owners bought it. And my understanding is the volume increased tremendously. In fact, I understand that KCI's, a lot of their Missouri demolition stuff is coming over into this particular site. And my other understanding is I've seen those videos, and you can see this pile burning. I don't know if you saw the video, but it's incredible how this pile, you look at a truck that's this big, these piles burning. And I'm telling you, it's probably from here, just past the Cyrus Hotel, is from the town over to this site. It's right up on this town. And these town members, they didn't know they were going to get a huge dump site when they got in here, but it's turned into that. Now, I don't know who's to blame. I did work with KDHE. I think that they did do a legitimate job of trying to go through their procedures, but there are procedures in place inside of their policies where they've got to bulldoze that stuff out, make sure that fire's out, and then start loading it up. And if it comes out, they got to do the whole thing again. And that's just not being done. People complain about going by there on their bicycles, maybe 5 miles away, and they smell that trash, the smells. I don't know if we have a statute about smells. I think there's something about that out there, but there really does need to be something done. I think it is a cooperative thing between the county and the state if we were going to make something really tight here. I don't know what the answer is, but it's not just turning the other cheek and saying that it's being done.
So, Senator, does the buck stop with KDHE? Are they the bulldozers going to fix this?
I think that the county's relying on KDHE to put some harder, maybe it's a little bit of EPA, maybe it's a little bit of KDHE, but the county has a memorandum that they put in place. Maybe it shouldn't have been put in place. Maybe it should have, but it's there, and they're having a hard time backing out of that memorandum. I'm not sure the issue there, why they can't just remove that, but there's an issue there.
How close is that dump to the nearest town?
Oh, it's close. I'm talking 100, 200 yards or something like that.
I don't know.
I didn't look at the measurements, but it's right there.
Maybe it was grandfathered, but that could be a problem there. So,
yeah.
Any questions, Representative?
How many do you have? Two?
No, I don't. Yeah.
Have too many microphones. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Pittman, what is in the county memorandum? Just give me an idea. I mean, I don't know what the memorandum does.
The memorandum lets them have a special use permit for a C&D dump there. And so it specifically allows this site that normally wouldn't be a dump to be a dump.
Because it was probably there and when they bought it. It was
It
there
was-
when they bought it.
It was
So
a
they
minor
put
usage
something
place for
together.
a local construction company and has been turned into something much more regional and interstate in nature. Now, I don't know what the right answer is here, but there does need to be something done. It needs to be done soon for these property owners.
So you said there's people from Missouri are dumping there. I know our county
company.
uses the ham quarries for transfer stuff. So transferring waste from one to another is done. And I don't know what kind of regulations they have to do that. But so others are dumping there is there anyone besides this one group in Missouri that's allowed to dump there, or do you know?
I don't know exactly all the companies. I know it's a regionally based. I know I've been told they have multiple trucks, during the day, if not 6 to 10. That was the stories I've been told in terms of identifying all the trucks. I don't know the whole region, who's coming into that.
Thank you. And one more thing, I think there is a bill that was brought to local government probably the other day from our county, wanting to be able to do something about these nuisance places. Is anybody on local government? I don't know, but perhaps we will find a solution within the legislature that will help. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for coming, both of you. Seemed to be a little conflict in my mind, which one sounds like it's okay. What would you like to see done? What would you like to see the result of your testimony here today, so we understand what you'd like to do to help you out?
That's a great point. I would like to see all these fires bulldozed out, and I'd like the KDHE to make sure that happens. I don't want to see any more fires. I know fires do pop up at landfills, especially when there's organic materials and trash. I don't want to see any more organic materials going here other than maybe wood and these type of building supplies. I think that we shouldn't have all these fires unless there are other things inside of that pit. So I would like to see a complete bulldoze across everything and layer it back in somehow and have some oversight to make sure that it's done the right way. And then understand the future. Maybe if they're going to have a memorandum, have some kind of an oversight by the county, monitored by the KDHE. I don't know what it is in terms of steady state, but something needs to be done in terms of right now, just cleaning this place up.
Any more questions? Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the way I understand it, this is a C&D waste facility, correct?
Correct.
And you may not be the,
I might not be the
but I
the
do
authority.
appreciate you coming in.
He knows the authority.
But it talks about in one of the testimonies that we had, it's a KDHE policy of enhanced waste screening. Do you know if this process is even being handled, considering, I don't know if you've seen these pictures, but you were there in real life.
I've seen pictures like that, but I don't know. I don't know what the enhanced waste screening would be. That's probably a process that the KDHE has. I'm not authority on that though, so I won't speak to that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Mr.
Any other
Chair.
questions? Senator, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity.
To try to put this issue down for the last deal, Leo, would you like to come up and be the marshal?
I got a PowerPoint.
Go ahead and for everybody here, kind of introduce yourself and what you do.
All right, again, thank you, Chairman Corbett and committee members for allowing me to come today. My name is Leo Henning. I'm the Deputy Secretary and Director of Environment at KDHE. And I do have a PowerPoint just to try to help visualize this. Do you have the handouts of the PowerPoint? If so, I'll just go page 1, page 2 while they're pulling it up. It looks like this in your packet, hopefully. So you found it? Yay. Okay. We'll just do page 1, page 2. How's that? So let's flip to the first page, which is just a map of where Easton is, just to put you geographically where we're talking about. Easton is just to the west of Leavenworth and kind of just north of Lawrence. So the next one is a picture, an aerial picture of the landfill. What you see on the left side is the city of Easton. Those green ponds in the middle of the photo are the wastewater treatment for the city of Easton. And then that white glob there just to the east of the wastewater treatment cells is the landfill. Everybody with me? All right. That landfill, I just put some rough measurements on it on Google Earth, and that's about a 12-acre landfill, just to give you an idea of the size of it. The next slide is an idea of what the landfill looks like when you're looking at it when you drive in. You can see that there is waste there, and it is covered with a lot of dirt, but that's what it looks like when you go into the older part of the landfill.
How current are these pictures, Leo?
These are, well, as Representative Neely spoke, I was out there Friday, and this is indicative of what it looks like. So the next slide is a compliance timeline, because there was questions about KDHE's inspection of the facility. So what I did was I went back for a year, and in that year, we've been at the landfill 8 times and had several follow-up inspections. Our first inspection at the top was in February 10th, and we did cite 5 violations at that time. We came back a month later, not quite a month, and verified that they were back into compliance. So that's an inspector going around, looking at the working face, making sure that there's nothing in the landfill that shouldn't be there. And so there was 5 citations. They were all cleaned up in a month. We went back out in April 14th. The inspector found no violations. They went back out on August the 1st, again, with no violations. Went out September 30th, found 1 violation. Went back November 10th, found 1 violation. The facility was back in compliance on 11/29. So it was the violations were taken care of. Went out on 11/17, no violations. Compliance inspection on 1/5 of this year, no violations. Went out again January 12th, no violations. And then we did issue an administrative penalty to the operator on January 26th for all the 5 violations cited above. And you can see for the various dates, it was a $6,500 or $6,250 fine. It's due this week. And in that fine, there was a note that if they fail to comply in the future with any of our solid waste regulations, that we could suspend their permit. So as far as regulatory, KDHE's effort at this facility, I think by showing this to you, I hope it makes you or brings you up to speed with what KDHE has been doing as far as compliance. So the next slide is talking about the fires. So Flatland on February 20 of 22 reported a fire. In 21, that fire was extinguished. In February 22nd, they reported another fire. It was put out that day. Another small fire was reported on February 24th. It was put out on the 24th. On February 28th, a small fire was reported, and it was put out that day. So, but that was the major fire. And I am sure that when that fire occurred, it was not a pleasant place to be. All right. But we didn't start seeing smoke until April of last year. April 14th, the inspector did observe some smoke. And then on July 4th, smoke was reported by the operator. And I will just say that this will happen. These fires will reignite underneath. Smoke will be, you will see it come to the surface. And, but you can see that we have seen smoke out there since April. So on October 14th, we asked for a fire mitigation plan from the operator. We amended the facility operating plan. And what that did was every time he sees smoke or a vent anywhere on the landfill, he is supposed to go in, dig it up, take the burning material out, and then, as noted, bring back a muddy water slurry and apply it into that hole that he dug up to put that area out. When I talked to the operator out there, he said every time that he has gone out, dug up a smoke vent, and applied the slurry when he had gotten to the bottom, that area then does not smoke anymore. So what he is doing does work. It's just that there's probably many of these little vents around the landfill. We asked him for a fire mitigation plan. They have provided that to us, and we have approved it, and he is implementing that fire mitigation plan. What that is he is to put 18 inches to 2 foot of dirt over the entire landfill to try to cut off the oxygen to getting into the burning material below. And so that is occurring. When I was there, about a third of the landfill has already been covered. So next one is just some pictures. The one on the, if you're looking at the pictures, the one on your left or my left, oh, it's up there now. On the left side there, we're almost done. You can see the smoke does range from size. On the left side, you see a vent that is smoking. And then on the right one, when I looked through the photos, this was the worst one that I can find that we have documented. I don't know if there's worse ones. I don't know. But out of the pictures I was given, I gave you what I saw as what I would consider what the operator sees. And the one on the right is the worst one that I found in the pictures that we had. Which way? Right. So this is the landfill operator. His name is Sean Britz. He showed me an area. This is an area where there was a vent. He went in, he dug it out. It was just a few feet underneath this top. And you can see there's a little bit of smoke around his feet there. And what he does is after he's excavated the burnt material, that's when he brings in that mud water slurry, puts it in there. And he showed me where he did this out there. And he said ever since he did that, nothing in this area has popped up. So he does know that he has to do this every time he sees a vent opening. So he has told me that he has done this many times. He's dug down at 20 feet at a time to find the burning embers. And then he puts his slurry in there and then he backfills it. Air monitoring, that was a question that was brought up. We've received requests for landfill or air monitoring out there. We asked for a plan. That plan was approved. They went out and did the testing last week. We've got the results back. We're reviewing them now. But what we did find are when they put the tester right on the ground level where there was a vent, they did find some what I would consider typical landfill gases, which are carbon monoxide, methane, and hydrogen sulfide. You see that in almost any landfill you go to. So, but when they put the detector right at ground level where that vent is, they detected some of those gases. When they then detected 18 inches above that vent, it was non-detect. But since they did detect it in the vent, they then went around the landfill perimeter to see if there was anything else. And everything around the outside of the landfill was non-detect. So we are evaluating the report. We'll probably have some questions about it, and we will probably look at some type of a long-term monitoring program from the facility to make sure that nothing is changing there. So I know that there was a question about odors. KDHE does not regulate odors. There's no authority for us to regulate odors. We don't regulate them at feeding lots. We don't do them at wastewater treatment plants. We don't do them at Lay's potato chips down south. We do not regulate odors. There's no statutory authority for us to do that. So the owner is I would need to add, I did go out there Friday because I like to see things myself. And when I did go out there, I saw no smoke anywhere. Representative and I rode around out there trying to figure out where it could be. There were some flags where they took those air instrument readings. That's the only way you would have known that there was a vent there. And when I went up there, and if you don't tell the secretary this, I'd put my hand in the vent to see what it felt like, because I wanted to know how much, because this tells you what the concentration is, but it doesn't tell you how much is coming out. And I could not feel any air movement whatsoever coming out of that vent. I would also say while I drove around, it did smell like a landfill. I would agree. There's definitely an odor there, but it smells like a mini landfills that you would smell if you went to one. I did every once in a while get a slight odor of like a burnt smell, but it wasn't pungent. It wasn't overwhelming, and maybe I was just there on the wrong day. That could happen. But the day that I was there, there was no smoke and really no obtuse odors. So with that, the operator, I asked him when he would get all the cover onto the landfill. He has some slopes out there that he needs to deal with because there's no way it's too steep. There's no way you could get a good soil on there. So he knows he needs to lay down some of the slopes so he can get his soil down on it. But he told me that by this summer he hopes to have everything covered, and he will continue to address the events as he sees them.
Thank you. Questions, Representative?
Thank you, Leo. Sounds like you guys work real hard. Hopefully everybody's in this. My question is, was this landfill originally for the city right there? And then it was sold to somebody else, and that person sold it to somebody else, and did they haul all this garbage or building materials in so it's not local stuff?
I'll tell you what I think I know, and then I'll ask my staff behind me if I'm correct.
Well, we're pretty short for time, but make it as quick as you can. Just
From my
curious.
understanding, it was the county's C&D landfill for years. Then they sold it to a private company. He operated it for about 10 years, found himself in financial difficulties, and it went bankrupt. And this current operator bought this facility out of bankruptcy.
So did he know what he was buying when he bought it out of bankruptcy?
Yes.
Okay.
And
That's our angel.
I can say no more.
Good job, Leo.
Has some of that gas escaping from the landfill?
I don't know if you had that on their phone, but that's kind of funny.
Okay. One last question, if I could, real short.
Thank you.
Wait a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Wait a minute.
On your one page here, you says you have a $6,250 fine due on the 24th of this month. When was this fine levied?
It's on there. It's on the left-hand side of that column.
Yeah, when was it levied though? When did you tell them they had this fine to pay?
1/26 of 23. Left side of the date.
Oh, okay, got you. All right. Now I lost my train of thought. Oh, I do want to say something. We have a C&D landfill in Nemaha County. I go out there quite often in the summer. I've never seen smoke there, ever, at a C&D landfill. I go back to Pica's landfill, which is obviously more than C&D. Never driven up in there, but I've never really seen smoke there either driving along. But
yeah, hopefully we don't want any landfills to catch on fire, but once they do, this is a common problem.
One final question. What's your recommendation to solve this problem that we're here today trying to fix? What do you recommend?
Well, I think we need to share the results of their monitoring with the county and with the locals so that they can actually see the results. And once we finalize our review, sharing that information will be our top priority. I think we need to give the operator time to put that 2 foot of cover and to continue to work on the vents. And if he really does believe that by this summer, this will all come to an end. I hope he's true, and we will continue monitoring to make sure that work continues. But we will stay there until the fire is out.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is maybe not a long answer, but what does happen if you suspend their permit? Then what? What's next for the event?
If we do suspend their permit, they would then have to come back into compliance. If there's a compliance issue, they would have to come back into compliance before they could start operations again.
It basically shuts them down and they have time, a certain amount of time, or you would work out a time? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Leo.
I'm going to have Representative Barth kind of go through this and explain it.
We haven't officially opened the budget.
Okay. You sure? Okay. Time out.
Well, I mean, you can take comments, but it's comments at this
We need to open the budget. Then do the
point. I
amendment.
think we should.
Wait a minute, Representative.
We should have a motion.
I make a motion to open the KDHE environment budget. Do I have a second? Okay. Representative Barth, the door is now open.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, Ranking Minority, and honorable members. My name is Representative Carrie Barth. I represent House District 5, and my proposed amendment that Mr. Chair mentioned to you is a study on health and environment effects of commercial or industrial transmission lines, wind turbines, solar arrays, and hydrogen hubs. This will affect the KDHE Division of Public Health Environment budget. I'm going to just hit on the highlights here because it's pretty extensive what I have entailed and detailed through here. So this is appropriated for the above agency for the state general fund for fiscal year ending June 30, 2023, and it actually continues on to 24 and 25 as well. For this environmental effect energy study, this is a $400,000 SGF study. It's going to study the effects, including any potential adverse effects of commercial or industrial transmission lines, wind turbines, solar arrays, and hydrogen hubs. We're going to highlight through, I'm going to kind of hit the highlights of the 1, 2, 3, kind of the A's and B's here. This is mental and physical health and safety to humans, quality air, surface water, groundwater, including aquifers and any water source that's used for public consumption. Looking at the land, including drainage and erosion issues, vegetation, any other environmental concerns, including deforestation of any area to construct such transmission lines, wind turbines, solar arrays, and hydrogen hubs. Number 3 there, the health and safety. This is going to look at the domestic animals, livestock, wildlife, and aquatic life. A is going to look at the hazards and effects of above ground and underground construction materials, including such materials degrading, collapsing and shedding, noise pollution. It's going to look at the sound and infrasound, low frequency, ice throws, electromagnetic field radiation, stray voltage, fire. I mean, this goes pretty extensive through all this. There's some additional things listed there as well. We're going to look at the hazard effects of the runoff and drift of herbicides. And it lists out everything there too around those different things that'll be looked at and studied. Letter C there in the middle of the page, establish metrics of such effects in order to have a baseline data to compare and analyze annually. D is going to take into account the different geographical landscapes, including the number of homes, the number of residents and water sources for drinking and population density of the state. Letter E there, review the effect of the area of transportation projects, including road and bridge utilization, before, during, and after these types of projects. Letter F there is specifically review the effects, including any potential adverse effects of these transmission lines, wind turbines, solar arrays, and hydrogen hubs. We're going to look at specific areas across the state, but we are going to look at areas where there are actual projects being looked at currently, Douglas, Franklin, and Osage counties, and any other county where projects are being planned or constructed. Letter G there, evaluate the impact of such projects on property valuations. Letter H, investigate the practices of the location of such projects. I think that's letter I. Perform a cost-benefit analysis of such projects, including the impact on the ratepayers in the state. J is going to evaluate the amount of energy generated by all mentioned sources sold for retail or wholesale for use in Kansas and use outside of Kansas. So it's pretty extensive. It's also going to provide further that this above agency, which is KDHE, shall ensure that the study is conducted independent of any public utility, the Southwest Power Pool, or the State Corporation Commission. So it will be an independent third-party study. Also, the expenditure shall be made to the above agency requiring any public utility that's currently constructing transmission lines, any of those types of projects. They would have to inform KDHE of anything going forward. If you flip to the next page, there at that first paragraph, the very bottom section of it, this is kind of just stating what will be done from there. So as of January 8th of 2024, KDHE will, and the group that provides the study is going to provide the preliminary report of such study. It's going to go to the House of Representatives committees on social services budget, agriculture and natural resources budget, energy, utilities and communications, water and agriculture and natural resources, and the Senate committees as well on ways and means, utilities and agriculture and natural resources. That's the preliminary study. And then if you go down to the middle of the page there is going to be a final report on this study that goes all to the same House and Senate committees as well. And that's to be done by January 13th, 2025. So basically it's close to about 18 months for the study to be conducted. During this time that we're gathering this valuable data, there is going to be a prohibition on issuing permits, certifications for commercial or industrial transmission lines, wind turbines, solar arrays, and hydrogen hubs during that time. At this point in time, Kansas does not have a comprehensive study like this in the state to help. We have companies coming into Kansas that have BlackRock and Vanguard billion-dollar energy companies coming into our state, that local Kansas people's federal tax dollars are being spent on to subsidize these large industrial projects at the expense of Kansas's health, water, and environmental long-lasting impact. Specifically, Douglas, Franklin, Osage counties are some of the targeted areas. They're one of the, for these types of projects. We sit on the Osage Aquifer in this area, and almost every home in this area relies on this aquifer for their sole water source. We just conducted a big study on the Ogallala aquifer in the state of Kansas, and really, we just don't want to repeat history here with creating problems down the road. We saw how valuable that was as well, and so we want to come up with a plan to protect water in our state. These new projects are not comparable to a lot of the current projects you've seen across Kansas. The new projects coming into our state are now in much more populated areas. The size of these projects are much larger than we've seen in existing projects. For example, the wind turbines now are close to 600 feet tall. And just to give you a comparison, so in Douglas County, I researched, just there in Lawrence, Kansas, which is where our tallest building is in Douglas County. It's about 7 stories tall. It's Fraser Hall on KU campus. It stands at 227 feet tall. These new wind turbines will be 3 times taller than the tallest building in Douglas County. And we're looking at putting this in our agricultural area of the counties. The size of the potential solar projects are estimated around 3,000 acres. We just heard about a landfill, I think was 12 acre or whatever. It's much, much smaller than this. This 3,000 acre solar industrial area that is comparable to 3,000 football fields, just to give you an idea of a visualization. We're talking about industrial scale commercial projects taking over our rural agriculture area, and we owe doing something here to Kansans. There's a lot of things that you don't see too that goes on with these projects. There's a lot of things, if you talk about a landfill that we just heard about, what's under the ground. There are massive concrete foundations that keep these wind turbines upright. Actually, we've seen in the news lately, there's a lot of them that are coming down. They're falling over. We have 10 to 20 feet thick concrete, 60 feet in diameter, just massive, 400 cubic yards of concrete in the ground. I'm just trying to hit on some of the highlights here. So I'd like to add the $400,000 SGF for KDHE to contract with an independent third party to study these effects, including the potential adverse effects of commercial and industrial transmission lines, wind turbines, solar arrays, and hydrogen hubs for the fiscal year 23, 24, 25. To equate this is only 14 cents per Kansas resident, so it's minimal of an expense. The study will cost less than it costs to even decommission just one turbine, which is roughly $500,000. This comprehensive study has minimal financial impact on Kansas compared to potentially devastating effects of not having an unbiased lens to guide Kansas with safe and fiscally responsible energy. Thank you for your consideration, and I ask that you approve this budget amendment favorably. And I'll stand if there's any questions.
Any questions, committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just wondering, Representative, have you talked with KDHE about this study? And then how have you developed the scope of work? And then how was the $400,000 arrived at?
Thank you, Representative. Those are all great questions, Mr. Chair. So I have done some research on this, actually more than I would have liked to have had to done. I've actually called KDHE, Department of Environment, and spoke with them. There actually is no study that exists looking at things like water specifically with our aquifers, so it's of high concern. In the state of Kansas, you have different depths of aquifers across the state. So where I live specifically in Douglas County, we hit our water table at 85 feet. If you look at Western Kansas, they're hundreds of feet deep. So when you're talking about putting these bases to these wind turbines and other solar and everything like that has runoff and different types of components going on, you're talking about massive disruption to the environment and to water with that. You asked me another question too, and I had an answer for you. I forget the second part that you asked.
Well, I'm not sure if I understand yet how the scope of your study that you're proposing has been developed. And then the other question was, how did you arrive at the $400,000 amount?
Yep. So from a scope perspective, because this is there's things going on in the district where I live as well. These types of things have been brought up as concerns. There are information, bits and pieces across the board. There is no comprehensive, it does not exist that would help us look at these different areas. The amount, I worked with our revisor and she informed me that a typical study at a baseline minimal study is about $200,000, but because this one is quite a bit more extensive in that, we were looking at a $400,000 amount.
Questions? So we have an amendment. We need a second. Have a second. So those in favor of the amendment, raise your hand. Opposed? It looks like the amendment passed. Thank you. Back on the KDHE merry-go-round. Next for comments is for the KDHE budget. Yeah, we're getting there. Is comments from just where on Josh? Yeah, just hers. From Virginia. Come on up. Introduce yourself, where you're from, and what we're doing.
Hello, committee. I'm Virginia
Southeast Kansas. I've been, thank you for my remarks today. A beautiful, oh, thank you. This state is a beautiful state. And I've been in front of this committee in the name of the state fair. And I realize how important your work here is to the state of Kansas. Um, today I come as a concerned citizen and thought perhaps I could ask you to think about a few things, a few questions that have remained unanswered to me in the last 4 months. Sometimes the assumption that when you guys come to Topeka that you have all the answers and all the cures and you go home and people don't realize that there's so much that happens here that maybe you don't know what's going on. And so today is kind of a communication day for my neighbors because these are questions they brought to me and got me highly involved in this project. If you haven't heard, there's a 345 kilovolt line going through the heart of southeast Kansas. That involves 5 counties. Um, it's called the Blackberry Wolf Creek line, and it is taking power from our nuclear plant, which that makes it a very serious thing, and it takes it across the line to sell to Missouri. Nextera has applied for this permit, and the probably the most concerning thing is that they've been working on this project for a long time to get a certificate of convenience. A certificate of convenience. And KDHE oversees that. And it makes sure the statutes are followed, that the public is informed, the landowners are informed. At least we have conversation in the public arena, and they document all that. I got involved in this project because a young lady who is a generational landowner who built a horse arena has ended up in the middle of this transition line. So today I'm asking questions for her, and that perhaps this committee can address some of these things because the system should work, the process should work, and you guys are the last defense for us citizens to at least be protected and our land be protected and our rights be protected. So my first question would be, who are our partners in energy? And do they have the best interest of Kansans? Or do companies like Nextera Energy, the largest partner in China Solar, only desire to build a bigger portfolio of energy sold on the open market? Does the KCC have the right to selectively withhold testimony from the Kansas industrial users? That would be Spirit, that would be Lawrence Paper, Goodyear, or Goodrich, and directly affect the results of a certificate of convenience license so Nextera's application would be guaranteed. Does the KCC foresee compliance to statutes that promise landowners in a timely manner before issuing any license that gives a utility the right to take the land by eminent domain? Why would the KCC entertain a permit, a request to expedite a permit on a siting plan when there is no knowledge that they have been out actively seeking public input? Most of these landowners have no idea. The list of landowners has been invisible. Those documents are important for the citizens to know, and at least the landowners to know if that line's coming across their land, or if they would be within that line going over their land. But my biggest question today is about the easements that some of these people have signed. Does
The rights to mineral, water, or any other rights go along with that easement. Are landowners protected on the acquisition of that land and those rights? Um, those rights could enhance a global energy portfolio to become even larger. And it questions our security because this line comes directly out of our nuclear plant. So with little bit of public input, there has been, the worry for my citizens and my neighbors has increased. And so the process to expedite a license or a permit that really hasn't even been properly acquired from a company that's from Florida or I don't know wherever. There's a lot of NextEras, but this is important that we address this because the amount of easements out there that are owned by these companies, it could be a mass amount of underground water that they could increase their portfolios on water. So thank you for your time. There's so many other questions. When you start digging into this, you have a federal arm that's got probably 15 other agencies underneath of it that we have no idea some of the regulations coming out that actually affects the way Evergy operates. And so when you can have coercion on both sides, it becomes dangerous because we have no idea what the federal government is mandating. And those mandates in a timely fashion come down to our utility bills. This line going across will be paid for by the utility users in Kansas. So trying to justify that sales of that electric on the backs of our citizens, a lot of my citizens are on fixed incomes. And that's where my biggest worry comes, is that when my citizens can't afford to live in rural Kansas, we lose a lot of institutional knowledge. So thank you today, and I appreciate your time. I'll stand for questions if you have any.
Exactly what you're talking about. We get letters all summer, and this is what we want to do by your easement, but please don't tell your neighbors. That's exactly how they're worded.
So in the hearing that I testified last week, they were asked about the list because that is part of the statute. That's part of the transparency. And when one neighbor doesn't know if the other, then it's not in my backyard. So unfortunately, I've been having to try to figure out who would be affected. So I went on the premise that everybody is. And so, in rural Kansas, that news grows slow because, we don't live around, Fox News. We're out there in the fields and our time is so valuable. And so, you have to depend on people like me that care enough to have the time and that people feel like somebody is representing them or at least exposing the issues. And, those people that have signed have been told that it doesn't matter if you take the money or not, we'll take it by eminent domain. Those kind of words frighten older people, and they end up on my doorstep. And because they know that, I take issue with people like that. So anyway, as we go, through this process, and we have some of our first meetings in March, I invite all of you to attend these meetings because I believe that if you're going to have a meeting in Girard, Kansas, and I have to drive an hour to get there, and citizens in Allen County who are 59 property owners, that some of them have not been informed, most of them have not been informed.
So, got lots to do.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to thank you for coming, and it's good just to hear from people that walk the walk and do. And I appreciate all you said.
Well, thank you for all your service because we depend on you guys to protect us.
One question before you leave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Crossland. Do you have a list of when the meetings are and the locations? Would you be able to make that available to us?
I do, and I'll get that to you in the email.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Henning? Do you have anything that, one question that I had, just listening to her. If someone has rights to build a wind farm or a solar farm or transmission line, do they also, when you sign that lease, do they get the water rights?
You should do.
Should I ask the following group?
That would be a Department of Agriculture, Division of Water Resources answer. I can respond, but I would not be the correct agency
That's
to do
okay.
that.
So, thank you. Okay. Luke?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'll follow up on that with the Department of Agriculture.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, let's have a motion to pass out the KDHE budget.
That was just a hearing.
Okay, I'm sorry.
There's no motion.
No motion.
At this time.
Okay.
Is that right?
No.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate the information that was brought to us today. But honestly, I think it's a mix of information is touching many areas of our state, and I am not a utilities expert. So I hope that the communities will follow up and see some other agencies about these questions. But I would move that we pass out the Kansas Corporation Commission Environment, Kansas Department of Health and Energy Environment budget.
Discussion. Is it KCC? Is there any discussion?
Okay, let's look at our budget.
You got it here, Luke.
Mr. Chair, I see no questions in my notes. I move that we pass out the Kansas Corporation Commission budget.
Second, anybody? Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Oh, comment? Okay, we got.
Just for a moment. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess to maybe get some clarification on one of the conferees or the informational hearing that we had from Ms. Crossland, maybe get some of her questions answered from the KCC. Could we do that, or is that?
That's fine. That's what we're here for.
Okay. I don't know who would entertain a question, but she says, does the KCC oversee compliance to statutes that promise transparency and accountability to the public, as well as landowners, in a timely manner before issuing any license that give a utility a right to take the land by eminent domain?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Is this okay? Chair Corbett, that answer the question? Appreciate it. So my name is Justin Grady. I work in the utilities division. So I was involved in the NextEra Energy Wolf Creek to Blackberry transmission line certificate case. The siting case is still pending before the KCC right now. But Representative, to answer your direct question, the The specifics of the notice provisions and the public hearing provisions for a line siding docket are very prescriptive. And actually, the specific statutes are in the presentation that I handed out for the committee earlier. And I would certainly be willing to, to answer any specific questions you have about that. But there's been no request to expedite the siding request or the siding permit, as I think was discussed. It's a very expedited process by law. It's very prescriptive in terms of every landowner along the route, a potential landowner receives certified mail, receives notice of the potential route of the line. There is a hearing process. There's a public hearing process. I believe, are filing testimony this week. In fact, our engineers are filing testimony regarding where we believe the best location for the line is. But I mean, we absolutely do, oversee and administer those statutes pertaining to the granting of eminent domain. And there are very stringent legal standards that have to be met. That the commission granted the certificate for that utility for NextEra to be a utility specific to owning and operating that line. That's currently being appealed before the courts today. But the proceedings themselves were quite significant. I mean, I understand there's controversy on both sides, but we definitely believe that our proceedings and process is quite comprehensive to determine whether or not it's in the public interest. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Not really. Miss Crossland talked about meetings across different counties, and she talked about that this would affect 5 counties. What are those 5 counties? Do you know off the top of your mind?
sir, I don't. I'm not directly related. I'm not directly involved in the siding process itself. I know that the law only requires that there be one public hearing held in one of the counties that it will cross. The KCC is doing 2 public hearings. So we have one in Girard, and I believe the other one is in Iola. I'm planning on attending those public hearings myself, but
Would one of those counties be Bourbon County?
yes, I believe so.
Okay. Do you have the dates and the location? Would you email this committee or myself, considering that directly affects
Absolutely.
my counties?
Those, I know those public hearings are set for, I believe it's March 1st and March 2nd. And we'll get you the locations, the time, and they're going to be in public, and they're also going to be a virtual option, so people don't necessarily have to drive.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Real quick question on some of the Ms. Crossland's questions on right of way and things. On these transmission lines for wind and solar farms or tie lines that go out of state or to the SPP to provide electricity to other states for their green energy plans, are the citizen ratepayers in the state of Kansas through the utility, since it's an IOU, are they still paying the cost of that and we get nothing back? And the other states are getting the benefit of our taxpayers paying the taxes on these?
So the short answer is no. That's not happening, Representative. So today, if a wind farm or a solar farm wants to hook up to the transmission grid, and there are costs associated with that they cause for network upgrades, it's clear, the law is clear that wind farm pays 100% of the cost of those directly assigned costs associated with whatever upgrades they require, they create, right? The generator interconnection, the transmission line that might go from the wind farm up to the transmission line, that's part of the wind farm itself, or the generator, the generation facility itself. So, if Amazon or Google or somebody is buying the output of the wind farm, then that's definitely paid. That's part of the contract price that they pay for that wind energy. Unfortunately, there's a lot of, I would say, misunderstanding about the purpose of this NextEra transmission line. The power, the nuclear power out of Wolf Creek is going into the Southwest Power Pool. It's staying in the Southwest Power Pool. It's not actually leaving anywhere. that the power that comes out of that is owned by Kansas utilities, right? And a portion of a Missouri utility. They're Evergy, it's Westar, KCPL, and KEPCO. And every megawatt of that power is not, it's not changing hands or changing ownership, right? Those utility companies still have the right to that power, to the offtake of it from reliability purposes and economics and everything else. So it's the real true purpose of that line is to relieve congestion that's occurring in central and southern Kansas and to more economically serve Kansans throughout the state. That something important to remember with that line is it terminates 1/2 mile on the other side of the Kansas border. Right. This isn't a line that's going to Chicago or going to St. Louis. It terminates at a substation just over the border of Kansas. So, I'd love to sit down and talk with you more about the specific benefits of that line. But there was a very extensive proceeding before the KCC before we granted certificate for that transmission line.
Just one final question, and who gets the electricity off that line?
It's not a one-way line, right? It's an AC line, so electricity goes back and forth and moves power from where it's currently bottled up in western and central Kansas, just further to the east in Kansas. It all
Right.
stays within SPP. It terminates at an AECI substation, which is kind of like an island right on the edge of SPP. But power moves around wherever it needs to go, like path of least resistance, as you're
But it's
aware.
not going out of state.
No,
Okay,
so
thank you. There you answered my question.
it's
We
not
need
a
to move
direct-
on.
Yeah. It's
Okay,
not a
thank
direct
you.
Transfer of power.
I just have worked with eminent domain in many ways. But I do have a question or two about it. For utilities right away, is it the same process? Well, actually, we've had payments made to us going across our farm, lines going overhead. Um, but they just send us money and we just say thank you. But what is the process? Is it any different for utilities than it is for a road?
No, Representative, I don't believe it is.
So the state or government has the authority to use eminent domain to locate certain things. But eminent domain doesn't mean free. Landowners are compensated. Do you know what kind of steps they go through briefly? I know it's complicated, but everybody's notified. Everybody has the right to tell them what their land is worth. Give me some of that.
So I'm actually not an expert in that particular aspect. Like you said, it is a complicated area of Kansas law, but I do know that there's a valuation process. There's appraisers that are taken into account, and there's a process to dispute. What eminent domain is always the last resort in these utility infrastructure proceedings, right? They try to negotiate one-on-one and actually purchase the land and have easements. There was information that was presented in this line siding case that I think something on the order of 65 to 75% on portions of that line. They've already received options to purchase that land. So it's eminent domain in all these proceedings is very much a minority of the cases.
May I just ask then if they've already made some arrangements to pay certain landowners in this deal? So does that help to establish the price that it should be worth or not? Are those? Okay, all right. Thank you. I just know that it's not, they're not just saying eminent domain doesn't mean condemnation. It means we'll pay you the value that is established for this project. And people are paid even though it is condemned by eminent domain. So I just wanted to be sure everybody understood. Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, some of the people didn't want to be eminent domain at all. Yeah, so.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we pass out the KCC budget.
And those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That closes out and passes out the budget for the KCC. Next on that, we're going to do a hearing on House Bill 2386. Open the hearing. And David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, good afternoon, committee. House Bill 2386. This bill would prohibit government officials or employees of any state agency, county, or city from entering or remaining on private property unless they are authorized pursuant to a lawfully issued search warrant, court order, subpoena, or the United States Constitution, or the owner of the property has given written consent to such employees. The prohibition in this bill does not apply to a law enforcement officer during the course of such law enforcement officer's duty. The bill would become effective upon publication in the statute book July 1st of this year. And I can stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any discussion? On my list today for proponents, it looks like is this Sam McRoberts? Is it written? Sam, you here?
Yes.
Thank you. Come on up.
All right. I am Sam McRoberts. I run Kansas Justice Institute, which is a free law firm, and we file lawsuits to push back against government overreach and interference. And I think that I'm excited to see that HB 2386 is being considered by the committee. I think it's a really good opportunity to strengthen property rights for Kansans. I say opportunity because I do think there could be a couple of tweaks to the bill that I would at least like to recommend the committee consider. And as a little bit of background, one of the issues in the bill, from my perspective, is it talks about the phrase "or the Constitution of the United States." And I am proposing that the committee consider deleting that provision, which might seem kind of strange that I'm saying let's delete a reference to the Constitution of the United States. But here's the reason why. Kansas courts and federal courts for a long time now have gutted Fourth Amendment protections, and they've gutted Section 15 provisions, Section 15 being the equivalent of the Fourth Amendment under the Kansas Constitution. And for a great number of years, these exceptions have kind of permeated through case law. And so there are all sorts of exceptions to the warrant requirement. And so from my perspective, if we are actually trying to strengthen property rights, we're trying to strengthen the ability to push back against the government coming onto your property, entering it, and remaining it, then one way to do that is to take out that phrase. Then, though, that's going to raise a question. What about a situation where there is a firefighter who wants to come onto the property to put out a fire? And so I think that can be solved by putting in exigent circumstances or exigency, which is almost like a now or never type of situation. I think those two suggestions should help strengthen the bill and kind of get rid of potentially a lot of these exceptions that courts have interpreted over the years. The last thing I would ask the committee to consider is if the committee is actually interested or wants to make sure that subpoena or court order is included, then I would respectfully suggest including an administrative warrant. An administrative warrant offers more protections than a court order or subpoena. Of course, an administrative warrant has less protections than a typical search warrant based upon, the Fourth Amendment that you would routinely or regularly see in a criminal type of case. So for those reasons, I make those suggestions with respect. One final point, what is simultaneously really cool and also kind of depressing about this bill is that we've been fighting about these things since 1760s. So James Otis in 1761 got up and railed against general warrants and writs of assistance in 1761 in Boston. And here we are today in Topeka, Kansas, arguing about the same thing. So I think it would be great if the committee could consider these and strengthen property rights by considering these suggestions I'm making. Thank you.
Committee, any questions? Okay. Are there any more here, people? Thank you, sir. Thanks for coming. Are there any more people wishing to talk as a proponent? Any written? Next, is there anybody wishing to appear neutral? Next, I have Mike Burgess as an oral opponent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
And as the chairman said, I'm Mike Burgess, and I'm the Director of Policy and Outreach with the Disability Rights Center of Kansas. And I think this is my first time ever, including my 10 years in the legislature, appearing before this committee. So
Took a long time, didn't it?
So we are the federally designated protection and advocacy system in Kansas, and Congress created the protection and advocacy system to prevent and identify abuse, neglect, and exploitation of individuals with disabilities. And so some of you may remember the Kaufman House is probably the situation that comes to mind here in Kansas. That was a farm in the Newton area that provided therapy services for individuals with disabilities. Unfortunately, prior to our involvement in this, local law enforcement had been unable to go on and find what they needed to pursue. State entities that regulated weren't able, were aware, or it was brought to their attention that there might be things that were happening there that they should not. And ultimately, it was Attorney General Phil Klein who had us go on site. And once one of the residents there said, "Help me," we were able to, our attorneys then had attorney-client privilege, and we began to then document what ultimately led to an FBI raid and federal prison for folks that involved doing work naked, being locked in rooms with a bucket, and various other atrocities that are just unspeakable. And unfortunately, our concern is with the bill as drafted, that because, well, we're not a city, county, or state entity, we do perform work on behalf of the state as the protection and advocacy system for the state of Kansas. And so part of that, and our folks have badges that they carry around that cite the federal statutes that create our access authority, which basically allows us reasonable access to go wherever people with disabilities are and receive services. And that's part of the reason for that, is because you have individuals who can't always speak on their behalf. And so we have to go see what's going on there. And so that's, again, in the case of the Kaufman House, others weren't able to do it. We were able to go, and that ended up getting fully adjudicated with that. So with that, I respectfully ask that you would exempt the designated protection and advocacy system from the provisions of this bill. And I would be happy to talk or answer questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chair.
Committee, you have any questions? Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the proponent conferee suggesting some amendments, exigent circumstances, would you be in favor with that?
Well, I mean, that, unfortunately, that won't cover the situations where we come in. I mean, that would help with the firefighters and others, but we go on and do monitorings with our staff where we during, again, I quoted the have access at reasonable times to any individual with a disability in a location in which services, supports, and other assistance are provided in order to carry out. That's straight from the federal language that grants us that access authority. So unfortunately, I don't think his amendment, it would still leave that potentially in conflict with the federal statute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you be able to bring in the Fourth Amendment in play with that then?
I'm sorry?
Would you be able to go into a place with the Fourth Amendment then, using your Fourth Amendment rights?
Well, ours is under, I have the citations on the bottom. It's the federal law. So it's not constitutional authority in this case, but it's when Congress created the protection and advocacy system, they wrote in specific access in that federal law. And so we want to ensure that we don't end up with confusion with that and the provisions of this bill. So I'm just asking for an exception for that, for the protection and advocacy.
Thank you, sir. or Mr. Chair, what would that exemption look like?
So in other committees, in other situations, it would just be as simple as exempting, stating that the provisions, and the revisor could draft this, but the provisions of this act would the designated protection and advocacy system for the state of Kansas would be exempted from the provisions of this act, or something along those lines. The revisers can draft that up much more articulately than I can.
And this may not be for you especially, but I think I have a fear of having this kind of law on the book and then having someone like yourself and your attorneys needing and having privilege to go when everybody thinks nobody can do this anymore. And I would be with our stand to ground laws and all of our guns we have in this state. It worries me that we would have any kind of bill that would say you can't do this, but we have a few exceptions, and I would love to make an exception for you, but it might be dangerous, and that's my comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For a minute there, I thought I was in a time warp and I had fast forwarded to the Judiciary Committee. I'm just worried about this proposal in that I think there's probably a lot of unintended consequences that could happen, and that perhaps we need some of our legal minds to look at this so that we don't put something in place that would have some unintended consequence that would really cause some problems. So that would be my suggestion, is that we hold this until we have some further clarity, or suggest that we have this re-referred to perhaps the Judiciary Committee.
Thank you, Representative. It's funny, this has been going on for over 200 years. And this bill is here because I don't care what, and we're going to hear it later. I don't care what government agency you work for, you have a hard time staying off my property. And when I say mine, I mean ours. And whether it's a water sampling from KDHE, and the guy says, I don't want you on there today. And the guy says, tough, we're going on your property. It goes on day in and day out. It's to the point that private property has no meaning anymore. This may not pass it, but we're going to work at it. We'll try to take care of your situation. I appreciate you being here, but surely with the door being open, like he said, you might ask, while we're talking about this, you might call your legal minds and say, does that leave the door open enough? But we'll work on your thing later in a minute. So any other questions from Mr. Burgess? Thank you, Mike. Next up is Joel Skelly with KDOT.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Mike stole my thunder. This is, I think, the first time for several of us that may be in front of you and the committee. But again, I don't want to take too much of your time because I know the hour is late. You have my testimony. Really, KDOT already has statutory authority when we go out to look at survey work for our road construction projects. We have a process that's set in place in that statute. We believe that the passage of this bill as it's worded would conflict with that statute and cause confusion. So again, our concern is how this is worded right now would cause us also problems in actually getting those projects done in an efficient and effective manner. So we don't want to delay those processes any longer than what they already are. Because I know we hear from folks that say, why can't you get your project done faster? And a lot of times that is tied to the exploration of the right-of-way that's needed for those projects. With that, I would stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Joel, I guess my first question is, how hard would it be to walk up to a landowner and say, I'd like to have written permission. I'd like to for you to be on my property. 15 seconds. and, or something, you know what I'm saying? And I'm not here to delay the KDOT or this committee. And committee, do you have any more questions? Go ahead and answer that if you like.
Sure. So actually it's, and the revisers can help kind of point to this, but it's in KSA 68404. And it actually does line out the process where we actually do send a letter to the folks, to the property owners, requesting that permission to come on the property. It's ahead of when, like, not even coming to their door. We're sending them a letter before we even get there to say, can we come on? And so then we do wait through time to be able to do that. We request that information. We'll actually call back out to check with them. Problem is sometimes we don't hear from folks back as to whether or not we can do that. And so what we will do then after that, following through that process, after those days, that longer process, we will actually then, a lot of times we'll come up and knock on the door if they're there. Sometimes they're not there. So we still have then the ability to get on and get off of the property, basically to do that testing, to do that survey work. And that's kind of how the process currently works.
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Joe. So, but the proposal, the bill before us, it says there would be additional, you would have to obtain a warrant or legal documentation in order to get on that person's property. So that adds, on top of what you already do as far as notification, that adds an additional burden, and that would slow things down.
Correct.
Perhaps.
And what we looked at it as the fact that we would actually, it says here, we would have to get written consent. So if we don't get written consent, we can't get on the property to do the survey work, which means then we may not be able to do the projects.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir. Next on the agenda is Kelly Olson, Department of Ag. Kelly?
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of this committee. I'm Kelsey Olson. I serve as the Deputy Secretary of the Kansas Department of Agriculture. I believe you should have a written copy in front of you. I'll try to just touch kind of the highlights and, of course, stand for any questions that you may have. But as a regulatory agency, we do have many various programs that we oversee that ultimately strive to provide protection to end consumers, preserving our natural resources, and just ensuring that there's public safety and health that is achieved throughout the programs. Those programs, many of them have explicit authority that are written into their statutes. If you request to be a licensee of said program, you are agreeing to have someone come on your property to perhaps inspect your dairy so that we can ensure the milk is safe and sanitary for consumption. But as it was stated, if this bill were to pass, we believe there would be some confusion and potentially all of our explicit authorities could be preempted and be found to be no longer effective. We believe that if this were the case, this would certainly dramatically decrease the agency's ability to ensure regulatory performance and potentially would severely hamper and damage the public welfare and safety of our natural resources and consumer protection. So with that, I'm happy to stand for any questions that you may have at this time.
Representative Bloom.
Thank you, Chairman. So I've been through this. If I don't agree to get your little acknowledge that you could come on to sign it before you license me, then you don't license me. So we're kind of stuck, but we don't have a choice, do we?
So there are, if you choose to enter a business that requires a license, and if you were to choose not to consent to the agreements of the license, we would have to follow administrative orders to.
It's out of business. I've been there.
Okay. Thank you, Kelly. Any other questions for Kelly? Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if like the dairies sign a pre-existing letter that would allow you to come on and do your inspections at, certain points in time, you think this would trump those pre-existing signatures?
Go ahead.
Because if somebody willingly signs on and says, yes, I want to do this business, and I will allow you to come and inspect my facilities. Just thinking out loud.
So I
Thank you.
think we have to be careful on it varies across the agency for our programs. Some of the programs, like the animal facility inspection program, when they apply for the license, there's actually a box which they check consent. So that if this bill were to go forward, that would likely be sufficient, potentially in terms of this, because it would be written consent. Uniquely, the dairy industry, as you pointed that brought that one up. I know that particular one. It's not necessarily a license that they apply for, as it is currently administered today. But they say that we're a dairy. We come on, we inspect, but there's not actually like a renewal application that they would do on an annual basis. So we would likely have to potentially seek statute changes or potentially seek changes as to how we were administer and review those licenses. And it's going to be a case by case basis throughout our programs.
Just a comment. On all these licensor things, if the person who, I'm just thinking, if a person who has the dairy or whatever, if that's the rules they play by to get your license and you want to sign away your Fourth Amendment rights, that's your choice. Thank you.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
Well, let's see how. Yep. Next up is Mike Holm. Are you on? Oh, are you written, Mike, or oral?
Yeah, we are going to be written, sir.
Okay, thank you.
What department?
KCC.
I'm sorry, Mike Amy, KCC Transportation Director.
Next, I have for an oral opponent is the Kansas Commission on Veteran Affairs Office, Robert Light.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, again, I'm Rob Light, the Operations Officer for Kansas Commission on Veterans Affairs Office. Appreciate the opportunity this afternoon to give you a perspective from our office and how this bill would affect us. The passage of 2386 would prevent the Kansas Commission on Veteran Affairs Office from conducting critical house visits to our veterans throughout the state, and there's approximately 200,000. We have veteran service representatives located around 15 field offices throughout the state. And normally they go to veterans on a normal basis. They go to veterans' residence to receive documentation and signatures required to submit a claim for their eligible benefits with the Department of Veteran Affairs. Generally, when a veteran or their eligible spouse is homebound, incapacitated, and does not have the means to travel, the veteran service representative will meet them at their home for a visit. This coordination is generally conducted over the telephone, or the means for written permission are not available. And finally, we have social workers and nurses that work at our two state veterans homes that visit veterans, again, for administrative purposes, to fill out paperwork and do a screening of them and see if they're eligible for care in one of our veterans homes. So this bill would already create a logistical burden, unnecessary delay to an already drawn out federal process and a stressful process for the state veterans to apply for benefits that they have earned and deserve. With that, Mr. Chairman, I stand by for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Rob, for your testimony. As it was stated with Mr. Burgess, concept of an amendment, would you be in agreement of his amendment, which would say I would like to amend to exempt the designated protection and advocacy system from the provision of this bill?
I would prefer not to speak for, I'd like to talk to my leadership. I would, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to talk to my leadership about that because I think we could run into some of the issues that Representative Carlin mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And one other solution might be for that, just like everybody else, whether you're in the milking business or the dog raising business. The government's never short of reform. I mean, you could simply have, when the veterans fill out his thing, just a form saying, I grant you whatever you want to say for access to my home. It'd be a pretty simple waiver. That's just a thought. There's two avenues here to think about for tomorrow. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else wishing to be an oral opponent? Yes, sir. Come on up.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, I didn't find out about this till last minute, but my name is Alan Hollinger. I'm the noxious weed supervisor for Douglas County and the president of the County Weed Directors Association of Kansas. We already have regulation on the books regarding how we enter property. And 9 times out of 10, if we're enforcing or inspecting for noxious weeds, if a musk thistle blooms tomorrow, we can't wait for a warrant to enforce what we've already got on regulations. So thank you.
Any questions? If you're in Douglas County, you might check wildlife and parks. They have all Lespedeza.
Yeah, and Corps of Engineers.
So, anybody else that would like to testify on this bill? Do we have a second?
We do have a motion.
Do we have, okay, go ahead. You want to make a motion?
I make a motion that we pass out
2386.
2386.
A second. Those in favor say yes.
Discussion?
Oh, discussion. I'm sorry. Well, there are, well, okay, really. Go ahead, discussion.
There's no railroad here, Mr. Chairman. We're not getting railroaded. We're not getting pushed through, sir. Here's something, because it's got a long way to go before it could ever get out to be made law. As it was testified earlier, there's been a discussion of this for a couple hundred years. So far, we haven't done it. There must be some reason. I would oppose this bill because it's far too broad. And I really, really believe it would be dangerous for KDOT or anybody to walk up to the door of someone who was unfriendly to government and say, can I get on your property to survey? We've got a bridge or something. It would just create so much havoc in the public and with different organizations. And I can't support it. And I appreciate the opportunity to express myself. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to agree with the previous representative. I think that this is just written too broadly and has too many unintended consequences. And I know that perhaps we may be seeing an amendment, but I don't think we could exempt out enough people to really make this bill right. It's not ready. And so therefore I oppose this. Thank you.
Any other comment? Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment.
Okay.
I would like to propose a conceptual amendment to exempt the designated protection and advocacy system from the provision of this bill. I'm sorry. I would like to propose a conceptual amendment to exempt the designated protection and advocacy system from the provisions of this bill. That will cover basically everything everybody's been asking for.
Is there a second? Discussion.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the previous speaker. The protection and advocacy should cover everything that anybody has for protection, for law enforcement, or for advocacy. It should be for KDOT and everybody too, because you already have the right of way. But it's the difference. You're still supposed to go get permission to go on private property other than the right of way. You can go on the right of way without any permission, but to go off the right of way, you have to have. But it's an amendment that's being offered as suggested for protection and for advocacy. I support the amendment.
Those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed?
No.
The amendment passed. Back on the bill. David, I've got an amendment. Dave, would you kind of explain this amendment?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would add in the line 7 there, it would be there would now read no government official or employee of any state agency, county, or city acting within the scope of such officials or employees' employment. This is just make sure that it's clear that we're talking about when these officials and employees are sort of on the clock. It doesn't prevent any of them from not being able to go on to private property for church or a restaurant or anything like that. So it's just when they're in the scope of their employment, and then they would not be able to enter or remain on private property, including but not limited to the use of aerial surveillance. So that would be aerial surveillance would not be allowed under this amendment. And then in line 10, we would list an administrative warrant as one of the documents that could be used to grant entry into the property. And then we include a new paragraph 3. This is the exigent circumstances that was mentioned during the hearing. This would be allow, if there was a fire, if there was some sort of other, safety problem, or in a pursuit of, of an individual or something like that, they have to come onto property. The exigent circumstances would exist to allow as an exemption to the general prohibition against those employees.
Any discussion? Question?
Can somebody define the word exigent? I've not heard that word.
Yeah, go ahead.
I could try, Mr. Chairman. That's sort of a term of art that's been used in a lot of the Fourth Amendment case law. Like I said, exigent circumstances is sort of an emergency, immediate situation that would exist, such as if you saw, a child or something drowning in a private pool or something like that, somebody could jump in there and save somebody like that.
For the revisor. So would there be an instance where someone could think that they saw an emergency happening, like there's somebody who's in need, but they're mistaken and they enter the property, then what happens to that person?
I think there's been quite a bit of case law. Sometimes that, like a lot of these things are, the Fourth Amendment's about unreasonable searches or seizures or entry. If it's sort of reasonable in the facts and circumstances of that particular case, that may not be a violation of that. If it was, reasonable to, a person at that time in that specific situation, it wouldn't necessarily be a violation.
But that would be up to interpretation, correct, from whatever judicial process it would go through?
Yes, correct. I mean, there's nothing in the bill that would spell that out. It'd probably have to be a court decision on that.
So I have another question. Then could you see an instance where a government official sees somebody who is in danger, but because of this law, they're afraid really to render help because they may then be putting themselves at some kind of judicial risk?
Go ahead, Dave.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the bill doesn't really speak to any sort of immunities or exemptions or any liabilities for that public agency. So I think that would be outside the scope of the bill. I don't.
So just to follow up, again, I'm worried about those unintended consequences, because if we put a law like this in place, you could have a government worker who does see somebody who is clearly in trouble, but because they're worried about their own consequences from rendering help, that they may not then act quickly enough and really put somebody in further danger. Yes.
Oh, Dave, go ahead.
Again, Mr. Chairman, I think that's a situation that could arise. Like I said, the bill didn't speak to any liabilities or provides any protections in that case. That would be again, a very fact specific determination. So I'm not sure I can really respond to that.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that line of questioning. So again, I just feel like we haven't explored, totally this legislation, and that we could be enacting something that would have unintended consequences that would cause further danger and damage to people. So I hope that we do not pass this bill.
Any questions? Yeah, Representative.
Well, according to several questions that were brought up, the First Amendment was recommended to exempt any designated protection or advocacy system from its law. That should cover police protection, anybody seeking help or whatever. The second part of this amendment, and the Second Amendment, is acting within the scope of such employees' employment, should answer the question I think KDOT might have had, because they're allowed to go on the right of way without, but to go on private property, you have to have permission. But within the scope of their employment, I believe that covers that. Would that not be correct if I asked the service? Legal. Are you the who?
Dave's going to tell you. Ask Dave again.
The scope within the employment of your job would exempt you from those questions of what the bill does, and the same with amendment that designated protection and advocacy groups from the provisions of this bill. So that covers employees in the scope of their job and protection and advocacy groups. Does that never cover those questions that are being asked now?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think the First Amendment on the designated protection advocacy system, that was brought up by Mr. Burgess that would be really specifically for the Kansas Disability Rights Association. So that group would be exempt from this sort. It would be sort of a new, we'd probably add a new B and B, like a 1 and 2. So already law enforcement officers during the course of their duties would be exempt. So if it's a police officer or somebody to that effect, and then we'd have the Disability Rights Association would be totally exempt from that. The scope of employment piece would just be then when the prohibition from entering private property would not be enforced when they're sort of not in their scope. So if you were, somebody had worked for the county and then went to a church or something, they wouldn't have to get written consent from the church to enter that property and remain. I mean, because they're not acting as a government employee at that time.
But my question is, for a township employee, we have to get permission to go on private property. Would that not, with exemption of employees deal, you have to go on there to get private property or town? I want to ask it for the KDOT. In the scope of your employment, no different today and then tomorrow with this bill, would that not exempt them from doing their job as in the scope of their job? Because then what's the scope of their job if this doesn't include it? Does that mean they can go anywhere, anytime they want to without permission? I'm asking, what's the scope of your employment? Trying to help you out here, Joe.
No, I appreciate it. Is it appropriate for me to respond, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Okay. Joel Skelly, Kansas Department of Transportation. The way I read the amendment is basically it further clarifies that a government employee, say one of our surveyors, were off the clock, they were not working, this would not prohibit them from going onto a private residence necessarily to visit with someone or to go to an event or something like that.
That's right.
This amendment does not speak to what we currently do, where we go out and actually send a letter to the private property owner. We go through our process that's designated under 68-404 that actually lets them know that we are asking for permission. So basically, if it were to exempt us, we would basically say we would ask that otherwise lawful activities be allowed to proceed. or under statute. Because we have statutory authority now. So you've got two statutes potentially, if this bill passes, that would conflict.
Okay, the question is, if you have that authority by getting permission, that's what you got to do now. So if you got that, that wouldn't apply to anything in this bill.
I think the question to the reviser would be, at least for me, is whether this bill and that current statute would be in conflict, thus causing confusion.
That's what I'm trying to clarify for you.
We interpreted it to be. And so just like you exempt currently in this bill law enforcement, the request then would be is, since we already have statute, to also exempt KDOT or those that already have statutory authority to do such things.
In the scope of their employment.
Correct.
That's my question, because you're to get that permission and then you can do whatever you want to once you get it. Is that the way this amendments read?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think as it relates specifically to the KDOT, it would be, I mean, because 68404 is the statute that's been referenced, and that says that Section G. Prior to entering upon any such property, the Secretary shall first request permission of the landowner to do so. Where consent to do the things authorized in this subsection is not given to the Secretary by the owner occupant of the land involved, the Secretary may proceed as authorized after giving 10 days written notice to the landowner or occupant of the Secretary's intention to conduct the surveys, examinations, etc. I think where this bill would be then is that when that notice, if the landowner did not consent, I think that the provision of this bill would say you have to have that written consent. They couldn't just have that 10-day notice and then go on. They would need the written consent of the landowner before proceeding.
My question is, do they need the written consent before this deal was to get on that property? You could just go anywhere you want to. It's a real simple question, I think. Maybe I'm making it confusing, but in my mind.
So sorry, and yes, to an extent, yes. If we are looking at property to put in a new roadway, to add an passing lane, we may need to get off of our existing right-of-way onto that property to make sure that we know what we're looking at. We may not be able to assess correctly from the right of way whether the soil is something that we would need to do something else with. And so before we ultimately would build a project, we need to be able to take those survey collections, get that data so that we then know. We're not traipsing across people's private property just for the fun of it. We're looking to make sure that we have the correct data so that we're building the projects at the best of our abilities.
Do you need that permission from them to do that when you do that, though?
Currently, no, we do not,
you
but
can
we advise them ahead of time, yes.
You advise them, but you got permission then.
It's just like the chairman said earlier, knock on the door and ask for permission. If we're not given permission, then yes, the way this bill reads, we would not be able to get onto the private property. We would not be able to look at that project any further. We would have to make changes to what those scopes look like.
Okay, might be something to look at there then.
Any other questions? Is there a second to the amendment? On the amendment, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The ayes appear to have it. Back on the bill. We're going to do it tomorrow, so we're going to take an adjournment, and we will see you tomorrow. Sorry, Fair Board, we'll get you tomorrow. You're coming tomorrow, aren't you? What? You're coming tomorrow, aren't you? They're fine.